In this video, we will show you how to replace your fuel transfer unit on this Ford Fusion. This will be located inside of your fuel tank. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to mention is to be able to do this, you're going to have to make your way under the vehicle and lower the fuel tank, so make sure you're in a safe area to do so. A quick note before starting this job, you're going to want to have the fuel level as low as possible. Once you've completed that, we're going to make our way into the driver's side rear of the vehicle so we can remove two trim panels. Let's start with this lower panel. For this, I'm using a plastic trim tool. You could also use your fingers, you just want to be extremely careful. Make our way in between here, gently pry this up. Just a quick inspection of that. We do have several locking tabs making their way across the bottom. We'll set that aside. Now we can start dislodging this panel. To do this, let's fold down the rear seat. Let's start dislodging this panel. For this, you could use your trim tool if necessary. We want to make sure that the seal does not get damaged, making its way along the panel. Just pop it up. Now, if you were looking at these locking tabs, you can tell that they do come through from the inside towards the outside. So to remove this, we're not trying to pull it forward, more towards the center of the vehicle. Once you get it out to this point, you really don't need to go too much further. This is the area we're looking for. Let's reach inside this area. We're going to disconnect the electrical connector. It has a locking tab. You just want to go ahead and press that in and slide it out of place. A quick inspection for corrosion. There's that locking tab. At this point, let's leave this disconnected and attempt to start the vehicle. What should happen is it should start and eventually stall out. Once the vehicle stalled out, go ahead and remove key power and disconnect your negative battery terminal. You're going to see your negative battery terminal right back here. We're going to loosen the 10mm nut, remove the terminal from the battery, a quick inspection, and set it aside. For this, it's easiest if you use a ratcheting 10mm wrench. We'll just put it right onto that 10mm nut in there. Next, we're going to reach in here. We'll lift this up and slide it aside. Just give that a quick inspection. If you see any funny colors, it's probably corrosion, and if that's the case, you want to take care of it. Now under the vehicle, we can see the fuel tank. This is an all-wheel drive vehicle. We have to lower the exhaust. We also have to drop down the drive shaft, which is located just above the exhaust. It's time to start lowering the exhaust. To be able to do that, we want to apply some support just underneath the center area. After adding support there, let's follow this exhaust forward to its connection point at the flex pipe. Now in this area, you should find that you have two studs protruding from the front towards the rear, and those are part of the flex pipe. There should actually be a nut on each side of this, on each one of those studs. As you can tell, our mounting hardware is pretty rotted here, but it looks as though the studs are still in good condition. We'll remove the hardware that we can remove and replace as necessary. Now, since I really don't have very much nut here, I'm just going to go ahead and chisel this right off of there. All right. Once you have movement from this area, you're going to want to have a second person holding along this area, and then we're going to make our way all the way towards the rear where the muffler is located. Back here at the muffler, looking along each side, you're going to find a rubber mount. We have to separate that from the muffler. That's easiest using a prying device. I'm using a pry bar here. We'll just pry up against the muffler and push that out of place. There's one. Let's do the same for the other. At this point, let's carefully start bringing this down. With the exhaust down, we're going to take our support and bring it underneath the drive shaft. Along the center area of the drive shaft, you're going to find a carrier bearing and a bracket. We'll apply support and remove the 2 bracket bolts. To remove these, we'll be using a 13mm. Now we can continue on to lowering this down as needed, and we should be able to pivot it around. Let's follow the drive shaft all the way to the rear differential. Now in this area, you're going to find that you have 6 mounting bolts holding the drive shaft to your rear differential yoke. For each of these bolts, we'll be using a T45, and you're going to want to have an extension that can pivot a little bit so it's not going to get bound up on the drive shaft itself. A quick inspection of the hardware, repeat the process for all others. Now as we remove the next one, you're going to find that you have a bracket that makes its way across. We'll be removing that as well, also inspecting that. There we are. At this point, we have all of the mounting hardware out of place. Let's take one of the mounting bolts and we're going to start it in just a couple threads. This is for safety. Let's start separating the drive shaft from the rear differential yoke. Now for this, the drive shaft itself does go inside of the cupped area of the differential yoke. So we're going to have to find a slot on the yoke and we're gently going to start tapping this out of position. For this, you can use a hammer and chisel or even an air chisel. Just be extremely careful not to cause any damage. Once you have movement from that, we can remove that safety bolt. Start pushing this forward and slide it out of place. Now we're just going to pivot the drive shaft out of the way so we can gain access to that fuel tank. Along the driver's side of the fuel tank, we're looking for the fuel filler neck. To easily gain access to this, let's remove this plastic shield. The plastic shield is held in place with 2 10mm headed mounting bolts and 1 plastic push clip. We'll start with the bolts. For the push clip, you can use a small prying device. I'm just going to use this trim tool. Generally for these, you want to pull out the center to unlock them, and then you can remove the outer portion as well to fully remove it. Now that we have that out, we can slide this out of place. With that panel out of the way, go over to the passenger side and repeat the process. We'll be replacing each of these push clips. Continuing from here, we want to start removing our 2 fuel straps. But before you start removing those, you want to make sure you have support underneath your fuel tank. Now we can remove the fuel tank straps. The process for one is the exact same thing as the other. We'll start along the front end of the fuel tank. For this, you're going to find a 13mm headed mounting bolt. We can remove the bolt. Let's make our way to the rear of the fuel tank. Now we can remove the fuel tank strap, a quick inspection, set it aside, repeat the process for the other fuel tank strap. Make sure you do not mix up your fuel tank straps. With both of the straps out of position, we're making our way back towards the driver's side of the fuel tank. You can see your fuel filler neck hose. Just above that, you're going to find a wiring harness with an electrical connector. For that electrical connector, you want to press in on the locking tab. While pressing that in, go ahead and disconnect the electrical wiring harness. Once you do have it disconnected, take a quick peek at each end. We want to confirm you do not see any corrosion. If you do, it needs to be taken care of. This looks fine. Follow the electric wiring harness across the body of the vehicle. You're going to find that it has a couple mounting points we have to dislodge. You can use a small prying device. I'm just using my trim tool. We'll pop this out of place. Let's continue down the line. At this point, we want to make sure we're in a well-ventilated area. We're going to be opening up the fuel system. Let's start doing this right down at the filler neck. We want to dislodge the fuel filler hose from the neck itself by loosening this clamp. Make sure you have a collection receptacle under this area. For this clamp, you can use a 7mm or a flathead screwdriver. We'll just turn this counterclockwise. Now we'll be using a hose pick directly in this area. We want to try to separate the hose from the filler neck, being extremely careful not to cause any damage. Now that we've used our hose pick and we broke this free, you want to make sure you lower the fuel tank just enough that you can move it around a little bit. Fuel could come out of this area. We'll be extremely careful. Let's make our way across the front of the fuel tank now. You can see one of the fuel line connectors, but there's another one that we want to dislodge first, and that's located just above this shield. We don't have to fully remove this, but we do have to remove this mounting bolt. Use a 10mm. Right in there's our connector we're looking for. Now I'm using a spacer in this area to hold the shield down. At this point, we can continue on to this connector. On the outboard side here, where my index finger is, you can see a green locking tab. On the other side of the line, there's another one. It looks just like it. Essentially, we want to squeeze the two together and then pull this out of place, away from the other line that's leading towards the front of the vehicle. If you have a hard time squeezing with your fingers, you can use pliers. Just be extremely careful not to cause any damage to the plastic. Once you have that out of place, have a quick look at the line itself. Looking inside the connector piece, you should see the green locking tabs and also some O-rings. Double check to make sure nothing's broken or damaged in any way. We'll hang this aside. Now let's move to our steel line. For this one, you're going to have a specialty tool that can slide inside of the fuel line and depress on the locking clips. While that's happening, we're going to take this line and push it towards the rest of the tube line, pressing it onto the tool, and then slide it out of place. We have our fuel line disconnection tool here. Slide that right in there just as I had mentioned. While holding pressure, now I'm pushing the line towards that tool. Make sure you have your collection receptacle under this area. Once it feels as though it's unlocked, go ahead and take this out of place. Looking along the rear of the fuel tank, just above your rear differential, you're going to find two evap lines. We have to dislodge these from the body of the vehicle. I'm just going to use an angled pick. Now for these, you can see one right out in the open here, and the other one's located just a little bit further inboard. I'm going to go for the inboard one first. It's a little bit harder to gain access to. Here we are. Get that one pulled out. Let's do the same to the other. Now let's start lowering the front of the fuel tank down. We need to get it below the body of the vehicle. Once we have that, we're going to pay attention along the top of it because there is some evap lines out there. but we also want to try pulling this down and away from that rear differential. Now that we've brought that down far enough, we can have a look up along the top of the fuel tank. We can see this electrical connector. Just go ahead and squeeze in on that locking tab along the top. We'll give it a wiggle and slide it out of place. Of course, a quick inspection for corrosion. That looks good. Now we're going to follow this evap line all the way over to where it connects onto the fuel tank itself. To dislodge this, it has a yellow locking tab. Where my two fingers are, there's actually a locking ear. So what you want to do is take each one of those two locking ears, gently push those towards the line itself, dislodging them, and then we're going to try to pry this out of place, just using a small pocket screwdriver. Once you can see that pulling away, we can continue on to disconnecting this evap line. A quick inspection, of course. Set that aside. Now, following that same evap line across the top of the fuel tank, you're going to find several mounting points to pry it out of. I'm just using a pry bar for this. We'll carefully start pulling it up and out of place. That's one of our evap lines. Now if we were to look just behind this area, you're going to find a second evap line. For this one in particular, it's the line that we disconnected from underneath that shield. So we'll start in the middle of the tank here and continue making our way towards the rear. There we are. Once you feel as though you have everything disconnected, it's time to start sliding that tank forward and away from your rear differential. Now we can start lowering it down. Once you have the tank out of the vehicle, go ahead and clean off the top. Perfect. With the tank down, the next thing that we're going to do is disconnect our electrical connector from the fuel tank transfer pump. It has a locking tab. Go ahead and squeeze it in and pull this up and out of place. Continuing from here, we're going to use a hammer and a brass punch. We need to take this locking ring and turn it counterclockwise, dislodging it from all of its locking tabs. I can see it starting to spin. Now that I have this dislodged, the next thing we want to do is just clean this area once again with some compressed air. Continue on to lifting up on that locking ring. At this point, you want to give this a close inspection. A little bit of rust is okay, but if it's rotted and weak, you need to replace it. We'll clean this one up and set it aside. With the locking ring out of place, the next thing we'll do is take hold of the transfer unit and lift it up and out of position. If you find you have a hard time lifting it, you could try prying it, just be extremely careful. Now we'll just start lifting this up. We're paying attention for that level sensor. I want to try to bring this up and out of the fuel tank. You should be able to gently flex this. Now continuing from there, we have one line that transfers over to the other side of the fuel tank. We have to dislodge this. To disconnect this fuel tube, you're going to find that it has a yellow locking tab, which makes its way underneath the bottom of here. Now for this, it has ears. You just want to take hold of the ear, gently flex it away, and pull it down and out of place. A quick inspection, you will be reusing this. Now moving along to the next locking tab. For this one, it has two ears. We want to use a small pick or small screwdriver, make your way just underneath one of those ears, and gently pry it away from the line itself. You don't need to go very far. Once you do have it pulled away, start pressing it up. Now we'll pause on this side, repeat the process on the other side, and lift this entire thing so we can disconnect it. Go ahead and give that a little twist and pull it out of place. You may have to completely remove this. Let's just pay attention to the direction of this clip. And now we can pull this off. An inspection of the line, of course. And there it is, friend. With that out of position, let's pay attention to the fuel tank. You should find that you have a rubber seal. Go ahead and remove that and we'll set it aside. Continuing on, you want to make sure you clean the entire port where that rubber seal will sit. Just use a clean rag for this. We don't need to use any sort of detergent. After cleaning the top of the tank, it's time for installation. We'll start with our rubber seal. Go ahead and rest that right into its proper groove. Let's install that transfer unit. For this, we want to start with the line. I'll carefully reach down in the fuel tank, take hold of that line, and we'll press it into position. Once you have that pressed in, till it's completely bottomed out, continue on with your yellow locking clip. For that clip, we want to make sure we have it in the proper orientation, the same way that we had removed it. Once you have that pressed in, go ahead and try to remove the line from the transfer unit. It should not slide off. Assuming that's secure, it's time for the other yellow locking tab. That's going to go on the bottom area. We'll take this and start bringing it up into position, paying attention to our locking tabs here along each side. Press it in, listen for a click. Once you've heard that, we're just going to squeeze it. And one last tug here, we need to confirm this is properly secured. As we bring this down, we're being extremely careful for our level sensor float. Just flex it as necessary. We should be able to get it in there. Now as we bring this down, we're paying attention to this area that protrudes out and away from the transfer unit. We want to make sure it's properly aligned with this area that says locator. Go ahead and press that down on there as far as possible. Now it's time for our locking ring. We'll be paying attention to the slots on the locking ring in comparison to the locking tabs that are on the fuel tank itself. Go ahead and get that aligned. It should press down. Continuing on, we're going to turn this clockwise until it's in the completely locked position on all of the slots. Essentially, in the thinnest area of the slot is where each locking tab should be. Hammer and brass punch, we definitely don't want any sparks here. It's extremely important to make sure you're completely locked in along the top of your fuel tank so no fuel vapors make their way out while you're driving down the road. It's time for that electrical connector. We'll line this up, press it in, listen for a click from that, and of course make sure it's secure. Follow that wiring harness. If it came dislodged from the top of the fuel tank, you want to make sure you press it back in. At this point, it's about time to get the tank back up inside the vehicle. Before we get the tank up in position, let's have a quick look along the top. You can see the two grooves where your evap line should sit through. Let's get this tank in position. We're going to have to lift the rear of the tank up and over that rear differential. Now let's apply some upward pressure here. Let's make our way up along the top of that fuel tank. We'll start securing those two vapor lines into their specific grooves. It's going to have to slide back a little bit more here. Couple light taps. There we are. Let's get the next one. Continuing on, we're going to have the connector going onto the fuel tank in this area. Press that right on there, listen for a click. There we are. Once you have it pressed in as far as possible, you need to take that yellow lock and press it towards the front. Listen for an audible click from that, double check, make sure it's secured. Now we have our electrical wiring harness. We'll press that right into this area. There we are. We got a click from that, a light tug. Continuing on, we can bring this up to the body of the vehicle. Before we continue too much higher here, while we can still move the tank around, we're making our way to the fuel filler neck and hose. We want to gently flex this, slide it together, but we're not going to put on the clamp until everything's fully seated. Press that on there as far as possible. I could feel the filler neck make its way into the groove. Along the front of the tank, we have our fuel line. We want to make sure we line this up, press it in, listen for our click, make sure that's secured as well. I could hear a click. Triple check to confirm this is properly secured. Let's continue on to the next line. That's going to lead right to this area. Once again, we're pressing it in, listening for a click, and double checking it. Heard an audible click and a tug. Oh yeah. Let's protect this area with its shield. Install your 10mm headed mounting bolt. Now we're back towards the filler neck. Before we tighten this clamp, just as I had mentioned, you want to raise the fuel tank into the fully upright position up against the body of the vehicle. Once you have pressure on that and we've confirmed that this is properly seated, we'll continue on with that clamp, bringing it into its original position. Use your 7mm or flathead screwdriver to tighten the clamp. When tightening this clamp, it's important not to over-tighten it. If you tighten it to the point it skips, you have to replace the clamp. It's not going to function properly, and you could find that you have a fuel leak from this area, which is extremely dangerous. Moving just above that fuel filler neck, it's time for the electrical connector. We'll line this up, press it in, listen for a click, double check, make sure it's secured. Continuing on, it's time to secure the wiring harness to the body of the vehicle. One of the clips should go right up in this area here, and then you continue down the line for the other two. Continuing from there, it's time for those two evap lines along the back side of the fuel tank. I'm going to continue using my pick. We'll just twist these and bring them into the proper positioning. There's one. Let's see if I can get the other one over here. And there's the other one. A quick confirmation, that looks good. Now it's time for the fuel tank straps. The process for one is the exact same thing as the other. Now we can snug each of these, and the torque for them is 18 foot-pounds. Repeat the process for the other strap. With each of those straps torqued to the manufacturer's specification, you can remove support from under your fuel tank. Once you have the fuel system closed and you've ventilated the area, you can turn off your ventilating system and we'll continue on. Let's install each one of our plastic shields along the side of the vehicle. The process for one's the exact same thing as the other. We're just going to take these and get them in position. Once you have them in position, you can continue on to your push clip along the front and then the two 10mm mounting bolts making their way towards the rear. This one's a little bit hard to get to, so I'll do that last. I'm going to do this far rearward mounting bolt first. Now we can go for the one that's up inside this port. This is easiest if you just use your 10mm on an extension. You can bring it up into position. Both mounting bolts are started in, we can snug them up. Take hold of that shield, make sure it's secure. Do the same thing on the other side of your vehicle. Now we're going to focus on reinstalling the drive shaft. Before we can bring the drive shaft into position, there's a couple areas that you want to pay attention to and clean. We'll start at the yoke of the rear differential. You can use a wire brush for this. We'll make sure we clean this up so there's no miscellaneous debris. Now let's have a look at the drive shaft yoke. We want to make sure we clean the base of this so it has a smooth mating surface. Let's continue on along the other side of this. Now let's move up the drive shaft to the carrier bearing mounting bracket. And now up to the body of the vehicle. Now we can start getting the drive shaft into position. We'll be swinging this up towards the rear differential yoke. When we bring this in position, we want to align the mounting bolt holes that are on the drive shaft yoke with the mounting area on the rear differential. There we are. Now at this point, it's common to have to lift up on the center carrier bearing area. That's going to make this press towards that rear differential yoke. Let's go have a look at that rear differential. Now at the rear differential, we've cleaned the mounting bolts, we used some blue thread locker, and we already have 2 of the bolts through one of the brackets here. You can see exactly where the brackets were originally located. That's where we're going to be putting these mounting bolts and brackets. You want to make sure you start in all of the mounting bolts by hand before you tighten any of them. Now that we have them all started in, we can snug them up and torque these to 26 foot-pounds. When we do this, we want to do it in a crisscross manner. We're done back here. Let's make our way to the center carrier bearing. In this area, we have our 2 13mm headed mounting bolts. Go ahead and start those in. Once they're both started in, snug them up, torque them to 41 foot-pounds. Remove support from under your drive shaft. Continue following that drive shaft towards the front and we can see our exhaust flex pipe. We want to pay attention to the flange area. You can tell I've already removed both of my studs because I'm going to replace them with brand new bolts. If you were going to do that, you could carefully just tap those straight out and away towards the front of the vehicle. Either way, you want to make sure you clean up the flange so it's a clean mating surface for our seal. Now let's repeat the process on the exhaust pipe. All right, let's grab our gasket and get this in the vehicle. Now we're going to start bringing the exhaust up into position, having a helper up along the front. When we're making our way towards the rear, at the rubber hangers, I like to apply a little bit of lubricant inside the ports where the exhaust hanger will slide through. It's going to help you in the long run. Do the same to both sides of the vehicle. Toss that in there. Once you feel as though both of the rubber hangers are properly in place, make your way up to the front mounting hardware. Now up at the front, we have our gasket in between the two pipes, and we're installing our mounting hardware. Start on each piece of mounting hardware, and then of course snug them up. The torque for each of these is 35 foot-pounds. Okay friend, one last quick inspection in this area, and then we can make our way out from under the vehicle. We're making our way into the driver's side rear of the vehicle. It's time to reconnect our electrical connector. We'll line this up, press it in, listen for a click. A quick tug, make sure that's properly secured in place. Continue on with your trim panel. For the trim panel, you want to try to get the locking tabs aligned and press it straight outward. After you feel as though you do have it locked in, go ahead and give it a little tug, confirming it's properly secured. We also want to make sure that the seat belt is properly aligned as well. We don't want that getting bound on anything. After that, just make sure the seal makes its way along the outside of the trim panel, and we'll continue on down along the bottom for our next trim panel. For this one, when we go to put it in position, we want to make sure all of our locking tabs are properly aligned, and we also have that one push clip. The push clip will make its way into this port directly in the center of this area. Slide this underneath the seat. Start aligning it and pressing it in. Press it in, double check the seal. When raising the seat to the upright position, take hold of the seat belt buckle. We're going to pull this out and away and raise the seat. Double check, make sure it's properly seated, and also double check to make sure that the seat belt is functional as it should be. Let's reattach the negative battery terminal. We'll push this all the way down onto the battery terminal end there, and then tighten our 10mm mounting nut. Take hold of the terminal end, give it a wiggle, make sure it's properly secured. Now it's time to attempt to start the vehicle. When doing this, we want to take the key and go from off to the on position without starting the vehicle. We'll turn it right back off and back to the on position one more time, essentially priming the fuel system, building up pressure. After that, you can go ahead and start up the vehicle. All right, let's give this a try. Okay, friend, we finished our job. At this point, what you need to do is double check to make sure you do not have a fuel leak underneath the vehicle. That's extremely important. After that, go ahead and close the hood and take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.